There have been many situations in my life that could have been avoided if I had chosen to be an asshole, instead of being nice and well-mannered. It goes without saying that this situation would have been avoided if I had let go of the idea that I should always be polite. This is not a story of assault or life-threatening danger, but it was definitely creepy, and in my mind, it could have escalated to something more serious. The situation went like this. I used to be very friendly with an elderly man and my neighbor. I felt bad because he seemed really lonely, as if he never had any company. At first, he would want to hug me every time he saw me, which I didn't think was strange, because hugging as a greeting or goodbye is very common where I come from. He eventually asked if he could have my mobile number in case anything happened and if he needed help. He told me he had suffered a stroke years ago, and both he and his wife were prone to falls that would result in broken bones, so I gave him my mobile number. Whatever. I would want someone to help my elderly relatives if they needed help in an emergency. He would then frequently ring my doorbell to share leftover food with me, which I appreciated at the time. Then, he would come to my apartment almost daily and ring my doorbell until I answered the door. He once rang 6 times. He also once invited himself into my apartment when I opened the door and proceeded to remove his shirt to show me a scar on his chest. I told him that I believed him when he said he had a scar, and he really didn't need to undress. He took off his shirt anyway. If he did not see me for more than a day or two, he would call me to see where I was and what I was doing. By this point, when he would hug me, he would sometimes lightly bounce up and down or rock side to side. When that would happen, I would push away and tell him that I don't need a hug. I would make up an excuse like I had a cold or the flu. This was pre-pandemic, and I did not want to spread anything to him. Shortly after this, 3 separate things happened on separate days that make my skin crawl when I think back on them. First, he put his hands on the sides of my head and gently squeezed. Then, he rubbed his hands on my hair and pulled my head towards his. I extended my hand against his shoulder and gently pushed away. I told him that I'm not a touchy person and don't really like to be grabbed. This is true, and not just something I was saying at the moment. Second, he ran his fingers through my hair after I gently pushed away from his dancing hug. I told him again that I am not the type of person who likes physical affection. Lastly, he gave me a regular hug with no weird movements, but then caressed my face with his hand and pinched my nose. I felt so uncomfortable and gross. I pushed away and told him that I had to get back to work. He slowly but firmly grabbed my arm and tried to initiate another hug. I pushed him away again and told him that I didn't need another hug. Each of these 3 things happened in my apartment, not on the sidewalk in plain view of others. After that last encounter, I made the decision to never allow him within arm's reach of me again. I felt and still feel that his actions were gradually escalating. I did not care to let things escalate any further. When he would see me walking my dog and approach us, I would quickly walk the other way and not respond to him. He eventually realized I was avoiding him and followed me back to my apartment. He asked me if it was something he said. I was direct and told him that I do not like being touched, yet he insisted on touching my face and hair in ways that made me uncomfortable. He responded and said, "I wish you said something about it." I did, multiple times. He still tries to talk to me when he sees me walking my dog, but I continue to completely ignore him. There are individuals who take advantage of certain assumptions younger people tend to make. I made the assumption that I should be unquestionably kind and social with this man since he was elderly and lonely. I made an assumption that my neighbor was just a vulnerable and frail person. I also made the assumption that nothing threatening would happen due to his fragile health, and I admit, it's entirely possible that I am just overreacting a little. But still, how does this pertain to being an asshole sometimes, instead of always being a well-mannered female? The truth is that I did begin to feel uncomfortable long before those 3 incidents took place. I felt uncomfortable enough to ignore him when he would ring my doorbell again and again. I felt uncomfortable enough to ignore his phone calls. I felt uncomfortable the moment he tried to give me that first dancing hug. Yet every time I chose to ignore that feeling of discomfort, as it would have been seen as me being impolite to an elderly person. In those moments, I valued the optics of good manners more than what my gut was telling me. I will always choose to be kind to others, but going forward, I will be more alert and no longer choose appearing to be polite over my own sense of safety. My roommate and I recently moved to a new apartment. We're both female. She's 23 and I'm 22, and the location is simply amazing. The apartment is pretty nice too, and the rent is doable. On one of the days we were moving, we met our across-the-hall neighbor, Russell. He came out shirtless to greet us and insisted that we would have to come over one day and try his homemade alcohol. Well, that day was today. I work from home, and my roommate goes to the office to work, so I was home alone. My doorknob is broken, so the door is always slightly ajar. I put in a maintenance request yesterday, so when I heard a series of knocks on my door, I assumed it was maintenance, and opened the door without checking, but alas, it was Russell coming to chat. Apparently, this man doesn't own a shirt. Everything was normal until he went into his apartment to get the alcohol and insisted on giving me a tour of his bachelor pad. It was then that I learned he was recently divorced from his 5th wife. I'm a people pleaser, so I said yes, but my gut was telling me no the entire time I was there. Keep in mind that he caught me off guard, so I'm also barefoot, slightly high, and I don't have my phone. Let me set the scene for you. Once I entered the apartment, there's a kitchen on the right, and then it opens up to the living and dining area. The kitchen was full of random jugs of green liquid. Instead of a dining table, this man had a full-size statue of himself, a folding table, and a single folding chair. In the living room, he had the most casting couch sofa I've ever seen, an 85-inch TV held up by Home Depot boxes, and 3 floor-to-ceiling framed photos of himself. He insisted on giving me a tour, and that's when I saw the bedroom. Red walls and a black and gold tufted bed rigged with LED lights and a red flag. It was really odd. He brought me back out to the living room to show me his YouTube videos, and he gave me one of the cheapest, most trashy outfits I've ever seen in my life, then asked me to model it for him. To hell with that. I knew I needed to leave, but whenever I would move closer to the door, he would get in my way. I didn't have my phone, so I didn't know what to do. Eventually, he started asking me to have sex with him, and I thought to myself how easy it would be for him to take advantage of me in that situation. I was actually terrified. I did what any normal person would do and said that my mom was coming over, so I needed to leave. He gave me a jug of the green liquid, which had to be prison wine. Then he told me to come back later with my roommates so we could have some fun. I have to live here for 12 more months. What do I do? I am a 25-year-old female living in a relatively safe country with a low crime rate in Asia. This incident took place around 5 to 6 years ago, on one afternoon when my mom and I went out to run errands not far away from home and I was home alone. First of all, I live in an apartment block where there are a total of 6 units on each floor. The delivery man or salesman would oftentimes mistake my living room window along the common corridor as my neighbor's window. My neighbor's living room window is actually inside their house. I remember when I was in the living room scrolling through social media on my phone when I heard someone knocking on my neighbor's door. I looked out from my living room window, which is sort of translucent due to being tinted. I saw 2 men based on their height and silhouette standing at their doorstep. One of them was shouting delivery. After knocking a few times, no one answered the door, so they prepared to take their leave. At this moment, one of the men who passed by my living room window literally tried to peek in through a scratch on the window to get a glimpse of my house. Both of his hands were on my window with his face pressing on it, and I saw one of his eyes. This scared the hell out of me. I immediately crawled onto the floor and went hiding in the room closest to the living room, calling my mom and briefly telling her what happened and asking her to quickly come home. After hanging up, I stayed in the room, closely listening to sounds and occasionally sticking my head out to check if the guy was still there. I think about 10 or 15 minutes later, my mom finally came home. She told me that she had just run into the delivery man at the ground-level lift lobby. Apparently, my mom was fuming with anger after listening to the full story, so she looked out of the kitchen window and actually saw that creepy delivery man looking up at our unit. She gave him a deadly glare before the man went into his van and drove off. After that incident, we would always cover our living room window with something whenever we were not at home to prevent people from peeking in again. I live in a house with a medium-sized yard in it that's fenced in. If you go out the back door into the yard, there are some houses with backyards on the far end. It's a small complex, and it's basically 5 houses all squished together into one that shares walls on the right side of the yard and a street on the left. I've lived here for a few years and I've had no problems, but about 9 months ago, this guy moved into one of the units in the complex. He seemed like a really normal guy, probably in his late 20s to early 30s, with nothing really notable about his appearance. He just looks like an average guy, and things started out okay. But I've noticed in the past several months that he likes to stare at my house and family in a very creepy way from his upstairs window. The first time I noticed, I had stepped out to let my cat use the bathroom. She was a stray when I got her and preferred to go outdoors rather than use the litter box, so I kind of have to go out there with her. I usually just sit on my back porch and wait for her to come back up when she's done. I'm sitting there one night and I have this really unsettling feeling of being watched. I started looking around and I saw the dude up there in his window. He had the lights on and the curtain pulled back just enough so that I could only see the left half of his body while he stood up against the window just staring. The complex is pretty close, so I could see him clearly. I decided to brush it off, but turned off my back porch light anyway, thinking that maybe the light was bothering him. He turned off his light, and that was that. The next morning, I went out again to let my cat out, and I swear I felt his eyes glaring at me again. I looked up at his upstairs window, and sure enough, he was standing there in clear view, just staring at me, not moving. It's been this way for a while, where I'll need to go outside for one reason or another and I'll feel his eyes and he's there. He moves around, so I know he's not a mannequin or something, but he is always in that window, either sitting or standing. I've also seen him up there with a set of dumbbells sitting in a chair, working out while he watches us, and staring into my yard with an expression that's really blank but also wide-eyed. If I move, he turns his head and follows me with his eyes. He's always up there, day or night, and I can always see him because he keeps the light on at night. Mind you, I'm not just staring into his window. In fact, I try not to look at him at all. I can just see him out of the corner of my eye because everything is so close. I have a 2-year-old niece whom I babysit on occasion, and she likes to play in the yard. When we go out there, he watches her instead of me. This guy was super creepy. It's gotten to the point that I don't want to be in my yard anymore, especially with my niece. I mean, with the houses being so close together, I've accidentally made eye contact with my neighbors several times before, but it's never been like this. Maybe I'm upset over nothing, but something about him really puts me on edge. Also, it's really strange to me that he never seems to leave that room, and his facial expression is just really strange. The best way I can describe it is that it looks like he's in a trance, but hyper-focused on us at the same time, or like someone who has mentally snapped. There's really nothing I can do about it except keep a close eye on the situation. One of my neighbors who lives in the complex told me that she can see him watching my yard when she goes out on her patio, and it really gives her the creeps as well. I always make sure my doors are locked and I don't let my niece stay overnight anymore. Any ideas on what I should do? This happened around the summer of 2000 in Midwest America, and I was a 12-year-old boy. I was shy and never did well with confrontation. Anytime I was scared, I'd feel myself shaking. Well, one day, my dad and cousin were weightlifting in the garage, and it was open. I then decided to grab my bicycle out of the garage and ride up and down the street while my dad and cousin lifted weights. As I was pedaling away from my house, I saw another kid riding his bike, probably 5 to 6 houses down from mine, but he's just kind of going in circles. I get about 20 feet near him, but that's it. No words were exchanged, not even a wave or a nod. I just kept my head down and kept pedaling. On my next circle back down the street, that's when things got weird. I get near the area where the kid had been riding, and he's not around anymore, so I guess he went inside wherever he lived. Right as I'm about to turn around and head towards my house, which is probably like 80 to 100 yards away, I hear a man yell, "Hey," in an unsettling tone. I look up, and a man is standing in his front doorway, probably 25 feet from me as I'm paused on the street with my bike. He's one of the creepiest looking dudes I've seen in my life. He had on a ball cap and he was wearing these thick Jeffrey Dahmer looking glasses. He had a tan, burnt orange, dirty looking wrinkled skin and had to be in his 40s. He looked straight out of a horror movie and he just had this sinister, angry look on his face. He then says, "If you say anything to my son again, I'm going to run your ass over." At this point, I was crying and frozen with fear, but then I started pedaling home faster than ever. I've never been in a situation like this in my life. I couldn't believe what happened because I never said anything to that boy. So I get to the open garage where my dad and cousin are still lifting, tell them the story, and they decide to go to this guy's house and address the situation that just occurred. My dad and cousin had a few beers and were pretty jacked, so they were ready to fight if needed. My dad goes straight to this guy's door with my cousin behind him and knocks loudly. The man opens the door and has this huge Rottweiler by his side, barking and going crazy at my dad and cousin. He threatens to let the dog loose, but my dad and cousin aren't cowering down one bit. After a bit of bickering for a minute, the guy goes inside his house and shuts the door. Nothing else happens that night and we walk back home. A few days pass, and now I'm about to get to the creepiest part. During the summer, when my parents worked during the day, my grandma would come over and babysit my little brother and I. We were about 10 minutes from downtown, and my grandma was going to take us there to grab food at Sonic. We get in her car and start driving down the road towards the creepy dude's house. This made me feel uneasy, but that's the direction we had to go. As we get closer to the house, the hair on my neck starts to stand up again. As we go by the house, I see him. He's sitting in a red truck in his driveway facing the road like he's about to pull out. I don't remember well, but I think he might have even had a grin on his face when we drove by. We pass the house and he pulls out behind us. I started freaking out a bit, so I told my grandma the story about the man driving behind us. At first, my grandma was chill about it, but then I noticed she seemed a bit shaken. This is because she had made about 6 to 7 turns to throw him off our trail, but he kept following us, every little turn. At this point, me and my brother were in the back seat with our heads down as he followed us, but luckily we made it downtown where it was busy. We got near the police station and took another turn. Then finally, he just passed on by. I never saw the man again. My mom and dad split up and we left that neighborhood 2 years later with my mom to move to the country. My dad still lives at the same house, and I wonder if that dude stuck around for a while or even still lives at that house. What was his intent? Was it just a coincidence, or did he plan on following us? It was so weird how it looked like he was just waiting in his driveway for us to pass by. So, where do I start? Well, let's see. There was the old hillbilly who'd always sit outside shirtless drinking a beer. This wouldn't have bothered me if my dog who loves everyone didn't freak out every time we walked by him. There was this one guy in the neighborhood I grew up in who got arrested for child porn and went to jail. But the one who personally creeped me out the most was this buff gym type guy. I thought he must have been on roids at the time. The guy looked like he could tackle a gorilla. He lived a floor beneath me in an apartment building. I met him and his friends at the building's pool and he hit on me and gave me a beer. Not really weird for a building mostly full of students though. He asked me about where I worked. Again, not a big deal. Except that a few days later, he showed up at my work to hit on me again. My little sister, who is much more shy and less comfortable with flirting, came to stay with me for a while. He hit on her too and gave her the creeps. A few months after all of this happened, I was walking the dog and came across a woman lying on the ground outside of the building. She was totally unresponsive when I tried to wake her up. I called 911 for her, and the next day she came to my apartment to thank me and we talked for a long time. Well, it turned out the creepy guy had been her boyfriend and was physically abusive, and she'd taken a sedative to calm down after a nasty fight. However, it didn't mix well with alcohol, and she passed out while waiting for her friend to come pick her up. I was really relieved when that guy moved out. I'm a 22-year-old guy, but last year I had a bad accident that almost killed me. Since then, I sometimes have chest pain and trouble breathing for no reason. My arms and legs also shake on their own sometimes. I live in the countryside on a big property with lots of bushes and trees. I'm really cautious and don't trust strangers. Well, one night it was 1:30 in the morning and I was watching a movie on the couch while my parents were sleeping. My sister was out of town having fun when suddenly I saw a bright light outside that turned on because it sensed motion. The windows were closed, but the light was so strong that it shined through the gaps and the window blinds. Then I heard the back door making noise. I thought it was my sister returning from her night out, but she didn't come in for another 20 minutes. I asked her why she stayed outside for so long, and she said she had just gotten home. I thought it was probably the strong wind because there was a big storm that night. My sister and I went to bed in separate rooms. The next night at 1:15 a.m., I was in the kitchen making a sandwich, which is connected to the garage. I should mention that my dog and cat sleep in the garage. Suddenly, my dog started barking loudly and acting crazy for no apparent reason. I thought my dog was barking at the cat, but when he didn't stop after a minute, I got worried. I remembered what happened the night before. I was always anxious, so I went to get a knife because the guns were in the garage. Just as I was about to enter the garage, my dog suddenly stopped barking. I listened at the garage door for a few minutes, but there was no noise. I felt really scared, so I decided to go to bed. I planned to talk to my parents about it the next day, but they didn't take it seriously. Now it's the next night, and it's 1:46 a.m. I was half expecting my dog to start barking again, and I had my knife ready. And just as I thought that, it happened. My dog went wild again, barking like crazy. This time I hurried to the garage, and as I got closer, I heard noises inside. I was sure someone was in there. I opened the door quickly, but there was nothing there. I searched the whole garage, but I found nothing. I told my mom about it because my dad was away on a business trip. I suggested we might need to call the police, but she didn't believe me and said I couldn't call them. I went back downstairs, thinking maybe I was going crazy, that it was all in my head. That's when I heard a whistle coming through the window. I rushed to the window and opened the blinds, but there was nothing outside. As I headed towards the garage, I heard a tap and then another whistle at the kitchen window. I quickly opened the blinds and saw that the motion sensor light was on. I went into the garage to get a shotgun, but it was empty. I searched for the bullets but couldn't find any. Then I realized that not only were the shotgun bullets missing, but all the bullets for the rifle, pistol, and revolver were gone too. I heard 3 taps on the garage door next to me, followed by another whistle and a laugh. Fortunately, I knew where my dad had hidden the spare bullets. I got the bullets from the secret stash, which the person didn't find. When I returned to the living room, I heard more taps, whistles, and even laughter at every window. It was happening at the windows around the house, including the garage window. The person kept tapping, whistling, and sometimes laughing at every window. I rushed out the door with my gun ready. The person had disappeared, or so I thought. When I looked up, I saw a tall, slim figure in a hoodie on the roof. I was about to shoot when I suddenly couldn't breathe due to my health condition. I fell to the cold ground, aiming my gun at the person on the roof. But my body started shaking uncontrollably because of my condition. The person jumped down, and believe it or not, he put his lips right next to my ear and started whistling. I thought I was about to die. Then he walked towards my pool. After a few minutes, I managed to get back on my feet, using my shotgun like a walking aid because my legs were still shaking. I thought the person had left, so I went back inside, and this time my mom believed me. We were about to call the police when we looked out the window, and we actually saw the person's head popping out from our pool. The police came and searched our property. They found all the missing bullets in our shed. There were muddy footprints all over our property, and to make it even scarier, the words, "Oh no," were carved into the wall. We also found out that he got into the garage by moving a heavy metal plate that blocked a hole to the outside. It was a complete nightmare. This person was whistling and laughing like a total maniac. I dare that motherfucker to come back so I can finish the job this time.